Perfect. Well, it's lovely to see everybody joining us this evening. So for those who don't know me or who I've yet to meet, my name's Georgie Lamb. I'm the CEO of the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation. I am absolutely thrilled to be co-hosting this evening's event with Martin, better known as Mart, who was announced as the inaugural winner of the David Shepherd Art of Survival Award only last week for his incredible efforts to use art to aid environmental rejuvenation. So I couldn't think of anyone more fitting to lead tonight's discussion. Before I do hand over to Martin to tell you all a little bit more about this evening and what our conversations will cover and focus on, just a few things from me. And it's lovely to see people joining us. So hello and welcome to everybody who is joining this evening's event. Firstly, we're all thrilled that you've joined us tonight for this free event. A little reminder, though, that if you do feel inclined to make a small donation to support our conservation efforts, you can do so online at davidshepherd.org. The merging of art and conservation is how we started at DSWF, it's how we raise funds, and it is who we are. So we couldn't be more delighted to be bringing you tonight's discussion with such a wonderful group of artists who you can see on your screen during our Art Month in celebration of the 2021 Wildlife Artist of the Year month-long exhibition. Just a little bit of housekeeping. In regards to the Zoom webinar, please do check your settings and make sure that you can all see the gallery view, so you can see everyone's faces rather than just the speaker and mine, which I hope isn't the case for many of you, which will give you a better experience this evening, as we're hoping this will be as interactive and very much a discussion and conversation and debate between our wonderful guests. So if you are looking at your screen at the moment and you're only seeing a speaker, please do go to the top right hand corner and try and change that to gallery view if you are all able, and it will be a much more pleasant experience for you. We are welcoming questions and interactions, so again, please do use the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom and comment in that, and we will be feeding those through to everyone throughout the evening. So please do comment and ask any questions as we go along. We'll be doing more questions towards the end of the event, but if there is something pertinent that you want to say or a question as someone's going along, I will be jumping in and interrupting our speakers when appropriate with any questions that you do have. So please do feed as many through as you want. I now have the absolute pleasure to very briefly introduce you to our guests and my co-hosts for this evening, who will take over from here. So first up, and I'm going to ask everyone to just wave when I say their name, because obviously I think my order might be different to everyone else's, as is the Zoom nature. So first up, we have Mart, who, as I said, has been a long-term DSWF friend, partner artist and passionate artivist for many years. Martin himself has raised over £40,000 for wildlife conservation and is a leading figure in the artivist movement. I know he has certainly inspired and connected many of us here today, so we're delighted to have Martin hosting this evening. Sofiya, a former winner of our Wildlife Artist of the Year Human Impact category, is a Russian-born, Singapore-based wildlife artivist and conservationist. Sofiya's knowledge of and experience in wildlife conservation, working in organisations and for groups such as Creature Conserve and the IUCN Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Groups, makes her art incredibly powerful because it's so steeped in factual accuracy and understanding of the topics at hand. Alicia is this year's winner of our Human Impact category with her powerful painting When the Whales Sang. Alicia is a biologist studying at the University of Oxford, as well as a self-trained wildlife artist, photographer and writer. Last year, Alicia self-published her first illustrated wildlife poetry book, Rain Before Rainbows, helping to raise money for the Wildlife Hospital Tiggywinkles. So Sophie is next up, who is a wildlife artist from the UK who specialises in capturing the photorealistic details of animals and their surroundings. Sophie is a passionate conservation and donates a percentage of her profits to wildlife and conservation charities through her artwork and through her online gallery and art store, Art Basket. Tom works as a wildlife artivist and artist who unites his two passions, his childhood love for wildlife and birds and his love for painting and art. After originally working to create custom works on musical instruments, Tom's move towards more traditional mediums have enabled him to really find his own voice and give back to nature. Tom is also an incredible art podcast host, so if you don't already subscribe, you absolutely should. And we're delighted this evening to also be joined by Tich, who is a Zimbabwean artist who started drawing as a boy, inspired by the cattle herding and wildlife surrounding him. After finishing school, he started selling art in South Africa, and since 2010 in Zimbabwe again. Tich is based in Victoria Falls, so we're hoping the Wi-Fi connection all the way from Africa stays strong for us this evening. Without further ado, over to Mart, the maestro of creative wildlife storytelling, to launch into tonight's event and discussion, which I will be peppering with any questions you might have throughout the evening for our wonderful guests.
Thanks very much, P, for that extensive introduction to this wonderful panel we have tonight. And I just want to extend my personal thanks to you all as well for joining, giving up your time to discuss the role of art in conservation. It's great to have you. For those watching, welcome to everyone at home as well who's watching. Thanks for being here. I thought it would be a wasted opportunity to get this panel of talent together and not show you any artwork and ask them to talk about it. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to start by giving just a brief introduction to wildlife artivism, and then we're going to go around the room and everyone will get the opportunity to talk about a specific piece of art that is relating to wildlife artivism. And then hopefully after that, it will just sort of develop into a general discussion about the role of art in conservation. So wildlife artivism, what is it? Well, I thought I'd start by telling you a little story. It's about 16 years ago when I was kind of working out what to do with my life. I went on a weekend wildlife filmmaking course, and during one seminar, a discussion broke out about the BBC landmark series Blue Planet, which had, I think, just launched about 4 years prior. Anyway, I was surprised during that discussion to learn that that series had actually received quite a bit of criticism from people within the filmmaking industry for it not having shown the true conservation story. And I put my hand up and said, but surely people seeing those mesmerizing images of marine life in all their splendor would just feel compelled to protect them. And I was politely shot down. It was a bit of a naive comment, and ultimately what they said was that people saw it, thought the oceans were fine, and moved on. There was no call to action. So jump forward several years. I think there was about 16 years between Blue Planet 1 and Blue Planet 2, and everything changed. Blue Planet 2 was a very different beast, and it was then also largely credited for kickstarting this war on plastic. So I saw Blue Planet 2 as a brilliant piece of wildlife artivism, because like with the first Blue Planet, it showed us some incredible animal behavior and beautiful imagery, but all the way through it kind of weaved this story of despair, and it told us about how the animals were in danger, and it told us why they were in danger. And so it wasn't then for a few years before I started looking in on my own work and sort of critiquing it with that sort of view in mind. And I realized that my work was missing a storytelling element. I felt like my works just didn't really have much meaning to them. And then from there, I started looking at the wildlife art industry in general, and felt that the level of activism that you now see in wildlife filmmaking wasn't quite there within our industry. It was, but maybe not enough. And so that's what sort of led me onto this path of wildlife artivism and trying to tell stories within the artwork itself. I think that's probably the main distinction for me, is that the activism happens in the artwork. And the reason I think it's important is because of the way we consume all our content now. It's largely online on social media. It's fast-paced, it's fickle. It's largely image-based as well. And I learned recently that our brains can process images 60,000 times faster than text. So to me, that sort of presents quite a ripe opportunity for visual artists to play a big role in communicating issues to do with the environment. So that's kind of where I got to, and I dropped the challenge of wildlife artivism into the community, and delighted to see that it has been taken up. Yeah, all these wonderful creative works are kind of coming out now. But that's enough from me. Let's dive straight in and see some artwork. I'm going to go straight to Sofiya, who is is, in my mind, almost exclusively wildlife artivism. And she's also very kindly stayed up until after midnight to be with us. So really grateful for you joining us, Sofiya. I find with your work, Sofiya, I find that I'm always learning something, because you make a concerted effort to tackle the lesser known conservation issues. And in this case, I think the work that we're going to be looking at now, if you're able to share your screen, is to do with the Asian songbird trade, which I had no idea about until I saw one of your works. So I wondered if you might just give us a little introduction into what that trade is and how your artwork relates to it. I think we're now going to do the technical thing of trying to share screen.
Sure. Thank you so much, Martin and Peanut, for introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Can you all see my screen? Okay, perfect. So today I want to talk about one of my artworks, which is called President Cup, and it's actually about songbird singing contest, which is related to Asian songbird trade. So for those of you who might not know, Asian songbird trade is a huge issue which is threatening a lot of species with extinction. So this trade is happening generally in Asia, but in particular in Southeast Asia, in countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, etc. So the species here, different songbird species, are traded for many various reasons. So one of them being religious practices. Another reason is to keep these birds as pets. And the third reason about which I want to talk today is for singing contests. Of course, there is a correlation between those drivers of the trade, but I want to focus just on singing contests today. So basically, what I will try to do now is to explain to you how the singing contests look like. So imagine a bunch of people, mostly middle-aged men, sometimes younger, sometimes with kids, sometimes without kids, bringing cages with the birds to one spot and put them all together. If facilities allow, they would hang these cages side by side. And after that, they basically try to make the birds to sing, which is not very difficult because birds are in stress conditions of seeing so many people and being around so many different birds. So during this contest, there is a jury. Sometimes it's just one person, sometimes a couple of people walking around and trying to score singing abilities of this bird according to various criteria. So these contests are actually quite noisy places to be, both for people and for birds, because keepers of the birds trying to make birds sing louder and more actively. So they would shout out, clap, whistle, etc. So when I first visited such a contest, it was quite a interesting experience for me, and definitely as for artists, very impressive one. So I decided to create the piece about it, but I wasn't sure which piece to create. So I started to learn more about different sizes and different formats of this contest, and realized that there are, this contest varies in sizes and also periodicity. So in some places, these contests are held every week, or maybe sometimes even a couple times per week. In other places, it can be a monthly event or even an early event. And they also vary in scale. So some contests will only include, I don't know, maybe 30 to 40 participants, others hundreds or even thousands. And of course, the prizes are different. In some cases, it can be just a token of appreciation, a small figure of a bird or certificate. In other cases, it can be a cash prize or sometimes very expensive prize as a car, for example. So people see this contest sometimes just as a hobby, but sometimes also as a money-making opportunity. So coming back to this piece, it's called President Cup, and it's actually called exactly the same way as one of the largest singing contests in Indonesia. So in this President Cup contest, there are thousands of people participating, and it's actually supported by Indonesian government, which is making the whole Asian songbird trade tackling process very challenging and very, very sensitive. So as you can see with this artwork, I just highlighted a tiny bit of Asian songbird trade. There are different aspects of it, and yeah, I will be happy to elaborate on them if you will have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely work, Sophia. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's again, I'm sure that everyone else is the same. It's just not something I was at all aware about until I discovered your piece. How many species are affected by this trade, and also how are they captured? How are they caught?
Okay, that's a lot of questions. I mean, just 2 questions, but there are a lot of information to answer those questions. Yeah. There are definitely hundreds of species affected. So ICN Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group identified about 30 of them, although list is currently expanding, who are really threatened with extinction due to trade. If we are talking about the methods of capturing the birds, there are different methods. Sometimes poachers will use glue, sometimes they use what's called mist nets. So there are various ways to capture them. I actually have one piece which is called Drawn Rip, and it's representing how the birds are getting trapped for Asian songbird trade.
I know it, yeah. No, it's good. Yeah, it's awful, and especially birds as well. No bird should be caged. It's just, it should be free to fly. And it sounds like as well, it's so embedded in the culture. What chance have we got of kind of bringing an end to this trade, or at least making it a lot more beneficial for the birds, not so cruel?
Yeah, it's a very complex issue and conservation topic. Like, one of the studies shows that in Java, one of the main islands of Indonesia, every 3rd household has caged birds. And as you said, it's really embedded in tradition, and there is a cultural aspect to it. So obviously, community and bird keepers are essential for conservation of the species. So, for example, there is one species which is called Javan pied starling, which is currently only found in captivity and not in the wild anymore. So the people who are actually keeping the species as pets are essential for conservation of the species.
And Sophia, we've just had a question, sorry to interrupt, Martin, from Kirk, just before we move on, just asking what happens to the birds after these competitions?
Well, it depends. People still keep them as pets, and they can participate in several competitions. Also, there is a particular, I can probably call it business, linked to this contest, because people sometimes try to buy ex-winners of previous contests because they believe that if they would put 2 cages side by side, the bird who is singing better can teach another one to sing as well. So this is also a possibility that the winner bird can actually be sold after this contest.
Well, thanks. It sounds a very complex issue, and I suppose one of the first things we need is awareness, which is what you're doing by creating these artworks and talking about them. So thanks very much. That was enlightening. We're going to move it on, I think, but just to reiterate, Sophia was, of course, the first winner of the Human Impact category at Wildlife Artist of the Year 3 years ago. We're lucky to be joined by the 3rd winner as well of this same category, and the 1st winner of the Ingrid Beasley Award. So Alicia, congratulations with that. How does it feel to be the 1st winner of this Ingrid Beasley Award? And have you started thinking as well about which organisation you might support with the grant?
Oh, well, thank you very much, because honestly, it's like such an honour and such a surprise as well. I obviously I'm delighted to have won it. But with regards to like the conservation charities, I really love big cats. So I was having a look like last week, and I really loved the fact that you did armor tigers and snow leopards, and basically because armor leopards are one of my favorite animals, and although you don't do armor leopards, that means I really love big cats. I used to adopt, and I still do adopt armor leopards through the WWF, and just because big cats are often so endangered, especially through not only the wildlife trade but also through like climate change and stuff. So I think I'd quite like to sort of support one of those charities, because I think that the cats are so beautiful and so threatened from so many different angles, you know, from climate change, from habitat loss, from us. So I think it'd be good to support one of them. I haven't fully decided yet.
Okay, that's lovely. I think let's turn to the artwork that won it for you, When the Whale Sang. If you could just share your screen. I should say, I think we've got a link as well to all these artworks in the chat. Is that right? For anyone that wants to view them at a later date, but there it is. Beautiful. This is the artwork that won it. And well, much like with Sophia tackling the lesser known issues, this is all to do with anthropogenic noise pollution. Is that right?
Yeah.
How did you have this idea? How did you come up with that?
Well, I guess it was mostly because I was involved in the British Ecological Society's undergraduate summer school last year, and we had to create like a blog post, and I was trying to think of something I was kind of interested in, and I think I don't know how I came up with it, but I wanted to research like noise pollution, like especially in our oceans, because I thought it wasn't something I'd really looked into before, and I hadn't read much about it. So I read quite a few papers, and it was quite interesting because obviously the effect of coronavirus means that noise pollution has decreased in our oceans, but obviously they can't sort of pull on the findings yet because it's still kind of happening, and they can see it changing over time. But it definitely, I think the human noise is definitely having an impact on our wildlife, you know, by causing like sort of beach drownings and affecting like migration and things. So like, the more I sort of read for this blog post, the more I kind of was sort of thinking about, I don't know, art ideas, because I really love sort of trying to convey things in artwork. And so, yeah, and then I sort of saw this prompt for human impact, and I thought, well, it'd be quite nice to kind of combine what I've just been sort of researching and everything with an art piece. And so I wanted to make it photographic, like sort of, you know, as accurate as possible, the sort of whale head, because I quite like drawing accurate things. And I think I wanted to kind of have it sort of like fragmenting apart. And I kind of liked the fact that it was a bit abstract. So obviously I meant it to be like sort of noise pollution, but equally it could be like the whale's actual song, like it's sort of sonar song. And so I think I quite liked the fact it was ambiguous, like depending on how you want to view the piece, it could be quite happy, but I think primarily it should probably be quite negative, because obviously it is fragmenting the whale, and that was like my intention.
Well, to be honest, because both P and I sat on the judging panel, and it was a very popular piece because it won. But it was a very clear message to us, I think, and it was a bit of both. You know, it was kind of, I think we were all drawn in by this beautiful whale drawing, and then kind of as you start sort of realizing the messaging, that's when it, you know, things get pretty sad, you know, and the way you've got it, the sound waves are just getting increasingly more erratic, and it does look like it's just tearing apart. And yeah, a very effective piece of wildlife artivism, and a thoroughly deserved winner. So, yeah. I know, Alicia, I wanted to ask you as well, because I know that you, and Pete touched on it, but you also express yourself a lot through poetry, and you brought out a poetry book last year.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind giving us a reading of one of your poems. I think you might have something prepared. That'll be all right?
Yeah, of course. The book is called Rain Before Rainbows, and it was kind of named after the very last poem, which is called Rain Before Rainbows. And so I'm going to read this one because I think it has a mixture of pessimism and optimism, which I think is a sort of important.
Yeah.
So, Rain Before Rainbows. When I was young, I wrote environmental poetry, the sort with angry words and a tone of desperation. I wanted to have a voice amongst the forest of adults' legs, who all seemed to have their heads in the clouds. Turning to birds, I loved to watch the twisting acrobatic displays of terns and skylarks. Coast and moor, two different worlds. I wanted so badly to be as free as them, and fly to a destination where all problems could be solved. And then it rained. A terrible storm full of hurricanes and fog and rain, a mix of tears from us and from the world. We went wrong somewhere, somehow. When I was young, I was always told there has to be rain before rainbows. So, a message perhaps. If this is our rain, then perhaps we will make our own rainbows.
Beautiful, and on such ending on such a lovely optimistic point as well. Well, that's lovely. Thank you so much for telling us about that and reading that poem. Really appreciate it. And obviously, the theme of your work in that poem was largely climate change, which is a lovely segue into Sophie's work, which she is now going to attempt to share her screen.
I will.
This is going very well with the screen sharing. I'm very impressed, everyone.
Okay, I'm hoping you can see that. So yeah, the piece that I wanted to talk about, I mean, it's a little bit more on the nose than the other pieces. Obviously, aspects of conservation that not many people have heard about. And this one, I think we can all agree, everybody has heard of climate change. And it's something that I think it's often spoken about so often now that people have kind of become a little bit desensitized to it. Also, I think that it's quite easy to almost dissociate and pretend it's not happening if you're not directly faced with the consequences of it. I mean, people just go about their daily lives. And so I wanted to create a piece about climate change that wasn't too evocative, because I know that there are a lot of photos out at the moment of starving polar bears, and they're very extreme and distressing. And I think that at times it's all about sort of, as you were saying before, Mart, about having almost like a balance between distressing and evocative, and also optimistic, and yeah, a little bit more hopeful. So yeah, I saw, I got the inspiration for this piece. I saw a beautiful black and white photo from an amazing photographer called Neil Jackson. And it was of a polar bear sort of looking over the edge of the ice at, I presume he was probably looking for a route into the water, but I sort of thought, well, maybe I can turn this narrative into an Artivism piece. And yeah, that's why I called this piece Thin Ice. And I don't know if I can I zoom in, would you be able to see that?
Yes.
So as you can see, the ice is melting. Very subtle, but yeah, it's conveys more of a story of where the habitat of the polar bear is going and the direction. Obviously, polar bears, they suffer from habitat loss, food loss now due to climate change. And yeah, I think this piece got quite a lot of positive feedback. Yeah, I think people could see where it was going, but it wasn't too distressing, I hope.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, Sophie, and that's what you just mentioned as well, the little droplets. That's the subtle storytelling I love about this piece. And when I first saw it, it took me a while before I noticed them. You know, I was making it so much to take in, and it's a gorgeous piece of art. And then you just start making your way around. And I remember clocking it and thinking, oh, that's clever, that's nice. You know? And then once you've seen that, you can't think of anything else. At least for me anyway, all I could think of was this melting away. And then you're thinking about the polar bear, it's kind of slanted downwards, almost trying to sort of, you know, cling on. And it's just very, very effective, another effective piece of
Thank you.
Artivism.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's highlighting the beauty, but also the fragility and the vulnerability all in one, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and that's the best kind of Artivism for me. So thanks very much for that. Yeah, thanks very much for explaining that. And on that subtle storytelling element, this is where we're going to bring in Tich, but has he just disappeared from the Zoom? Oh no. Tich, are you still there? Oh, he's there.
Yes.
Tich, joining us from Vic Falls, where the Wi-Fi is maybe not as good, but I think we'd all rather be where you are. Tich, thanks so much for joining us, and congrats as well on the sale of your artwork, because the one we're going to talk about was shortlisted for Wildlife Artist of the Year, and I noticed it sold, so that's big.
Yeah, I'm quite happy about that. Thank you, Martin, for welcoming me to the platform.
Not at all, and I'm not at all surprised it sold as well, because it is stunning. Tich, are you able to try the screen share?
Yeah, yeah.
So we can all have a look. Otherwise, it is
Okay.
in the chat as well. There's the link at the top. If anyone
Okay. All right. So let me try to share my screen with you guys.
Just while Tich is sharing his screen, just to say thank you so much to Demelza, to Sue, to Jane, who all, Alicia, commenting on your incredible message and your artwork, and someone, an anonymous attendee who just said your poem brought tears to their eyes, which I think we'll all agree to. I'll come back to some of the questions in a minute that we've had coming through while we jump back to Tich.
Nice.
Okay, so while I'm still trying to get my screen shared with you guys, maybe I could be talking about my artwork.
Yes, please. I'd love to know how you came up with the idea, because it's lovely.
Yes. So, you know, maybe I'll ask Peanut to help share that screen for me. Just help grab my my artwork and share the screen. Yeah. So whilst we're trying to get the picture to share the screen with you, you know, growing up in Cholocho, some place deep in the rurals, like I mentioned in my bio, it's close to Wange National Park. You see, so I grew up. Yeah, thank you. There it is.
Beautiful. Look at that. Wow.
So you all can see that now. Hey, so I could see all these animals, especially the zebras, little bit of lions. It made me to be so attached to the wildlife. And I'm sure you all know the shooting of Cecil the Lion some couple of years back. That was July 2015, right? So you see in the zebra eye, there's a
I think we might be having
iron reflection. So that is actually inspired by Cecil and his brother Jericho, Cecil the late lion.
All right, I didn't realize that.
Can you all hear me now? Hey.
Yes, you dropped off for a second, but you're back.
Okay, fantastic. So what I was saying is you see those two male lions there is the shadows of Cecil, the guy in front, that is Cecil, but he's late. He was shot. That was 1st of July 2015. But Jericho is still there. You know, the life in the ghetto, the life in the wild, the zebras and the lions, you know, the hunter and the hunted. But once Cecil was shot, it made me realize how important were these lions to the ecosystem of the Wange National Park. So I can say briefly, this painting was inspired by the cruelty which is still happening to our beautiful wildlife here in the Wange National Park. So yeah, and the other thing which is in the heat these days is the mining, which has been banned, of course, but the process is still underway by our local government here in Zimbabwe, the mining in the Wange National Park. So
Was it just dropped off? I think we got most of that though. That's fascinating. I didn't realize it was inspired by Cecil, but I think maybe Tish
that will definitely cause a dire situation to the Wange National Park. So this piece, my attachment to the, okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
It's just dropping off a little bit, Titch, at times, but let's persist. Keep going.
Oh yeah, I'm in an area where there is a bird network reception. My apologies for that.
It's not your fault.
Yeah, so briefly, yes, yeah. So briefly, this piece was inspired by all these circumstances which we have experienced here down this side of the Wange National Park. So you see that Wange National Park is one of the biggest national parks here in Zimbabwe, home of the elephants, home of the lions, wild dogs, and you can name them. So yeah, I can say yeah.
Yeah,
like
well, Tish, thanks so much for giving us that wonderful insight. I just love that piece so much, and I think as well, I have also attempted myself this the use of the reflection, and it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to get it
Yes.
right, but you've absolutely nailed it with that one. And it's also I love these works that you get really up close and personal with them, and when it's a focus on the eye, because that's where all the emotion is, and in this instance you get a little insight into that zebra's life and what it's seeing, and the sort of the tension and everything around that. I think having a work like that is so up close and personal just helps you connect with the animal. And I think certainly something I found is that we're more and more disconnected from the natural world. And I think this kind of leads in as well to Tom's piece, which we're going to see next. Tom, if you're able to bring yours up, your work here, does it have a title? Does it?
It does, and I can't remember what it is right at the moment.
Okay, it's something about disconnect, isn't it? But
lost connection. There we go.
Lost connection.
Always professional.
Would you tell us a bit about this, please?
Yeah, so it was to be fair, this is kind of my first what I would call proper Artivism piece, i.e. there's a more obvious story behind it rather than just a pretty painting of some wildlife, which is generally what I've done in the past. I'm very much inspired by yourself, I must say that. So yeah, kind of my first foray, but the first of many ideas that I have. But this one in particular, I guess fairly obviously, we're talking about the loss of connection, and particularly the loss of connection with nature. And in some ways it's like the literal loss of habitat and that sort of thing. But actually it's really, like a deeper look at our loss of connection with nature as humans and the potential problems that is kind of causing. I chose the orangutan because I think firstly it's an animal we can all connect with in many different ways. It's a fairly famous, destruction of habitat in relation to palm oil as well as many other things, but that's an obvious one that many people are aware of, so I think that's quite engaging. But I think as humans we're so close to orangutans as well that in some ways we can almost, I feel it draws people in, that we can maybe put ourselves in place of the orangutan. And then I chose the headphones. It was slightly tongue-in-cheek, and it was a sort of anti-tip of the hat to the Kindle, I think it was Kindle or Audible or something like that, where the orangutans had the headphones on. But it was more kind of talking about kind of the role of technology in taking us further and further away from our connection with nature. And it's not that I am anti-technology in any way whatsoever. It's fantastic. It's got a great place. Technology itself is not inherently good or bad, but the way we choose to use it, how we let it shape our world on a personal and a global level, it can have bad and good consequences. And it has the potential, I think, to pull us further and further away from our engagement with nature. And I think if that is not kept in check, there's definitely a potential for apathy or a feeling that we are separate from nature, which is not true, rather than we are, deeply connected and very much an active part of the natural world, which is very much true. For example, like I could easily imagine someone thinking like, yes, I get all of these bad things are happening, poaching for animal parts, killing for sport, habitat destruction, etc., plastic, all of these problems exist. But I think that there can be a tendency, if we're not careful, for this apathy to creep in. Like, it doesn't directly affect me. You know, why should I care so much? Why should I consider altering my behavior? Why should I consider supporting certain causes? And I think, you know, when we start to reconnect and realize that nature and the earth is not kind of some abstract idea that's over there and nothing to do with us, but rather that it is part of us and we are part of it, I think it allows then for potentially a higher level of empathy for the natural world. And then I think when we have that empathy, it can snowball into starting to realize the importance of the awareness of our actions on a day-to-day basis, and then also the necessity of conservation. And then going deeper still, maybe we can start to really feel how the trauma that the earth is suffering and everything in it is like, it's our own trauma as well. It's not a separate entity. It is our problem very directly. It's our trauma. And I think this is interesting because it kind of comes back round then to art, which has the potential to bypass the kind of logical mind, and we can kind of speak straight to people's hearts, and even deeper than that, you know, a really deep place that's kind of programmed well within us, this kind of connection to nature that I think we've, as a whole, maybe as a society, we've slightly lost that connection. I've definitely heard the expression like mass amnesia kind of used in relation to this, and I think there's an element of that going on. And it's not like we have to shun all of modern society and we have to kick out all technology. It's not that at all. It's just, I think, how can we find a way of kind of getting back to having like a reciprocal relationship with nature, one where we don't just kind of take and destroy for our own personal gain and for the collective gain. It's more, you know, if we ask the question like, you know, with all of the gifts that we receive from nature, and there are so many that are so wonderful, like how can we give back? Like, we receive so much, how can we give back? And as an artist, one of the many ways that I feel that we can give back, or that I can, is to, how do you put it? I don't know, kind of bridge the gap between ourselves and nature. And I feel that gap is the underlying big issue that underpins all of the other issues that we face or the natural world face, and then we face as a result, if that kind of makes sense. So I went off on one there, but that's kind of, all of that is kind of wrapped up in my thought process behind that piece.
Thanks, Tom, for that. It's really interesting, and I think I love this piece so much. It really, the message is so clear there. And I think, just trying to pick up on a couple of things you said, but that sort of reconnecting, I feel, well, there's two things. One thing is I kind of want people to take on a little bit of my angst, you know, if you know, because I feel like it's that sort of, you know, out of sight, out of mind, everything's fine sort of view. And if you're not being presented, you know, with these issues, as we all are, and this will come on to talk about echo chambers in a minute, you're not seeing it, you know, you're just not engaged. And so that's where I think wildlife artivism can come in, and it can just, it's almost just creeping up and knocking and be like, hey, wake up a little bit. Look, this is happening.
Well, I think art can be so many things, can't it? Like it can be beautiful, it can be ugly, it can be positive, it can be negative. You know, you can have a hard-hitting message, you can stimulate conversation, but there's so many different roles it can play. But you spoke about, I think a lot of it is a reminder of our potential to connect on a deeper level to the natural world. And then once we have that connection, that kind of gives us the meaning behind why we should care. And for me, that is one of the roles of art within conservation and kind of grabbing people's attention. Yeah.
I want to, and maybe I'll open this up as well to everyone, but this point of, I do get worried by these echo chambers and the way, like, our lives are largely dictated by algorithms now. And they sort of, you know, we're all online, we spend more and more time online. And these algorithms are telling us what they think we want to see. So, you know, we're probably all seeing imagery of nature, whereas a lot of other people aren't seeing that at all. They're in their completely different echo chamber. So you then start thinking, gosh, we're hosting events like this. I'm sure most of the people watching here have signed up because they have an interest in the environment, you know. So you do start wondering, are we just preaching to the converted? So the question is, how do we break through these echo chambers? How do we get out of it and reach people on a wider sort of scale? Does anyone have any ideas? I know it's not an easy question to answer.
I think one of the big things, and I know we're, as wildlife artists, we're all kind of, I think we can relate to this, is like, firstly, raising the profile of wildlife art, which I know is something we've all touched on before, that it maybe has this you know, perception of being maybe a lesser art form and all of that sort of thing. And I think there are so many different avenues, but I think one of them is raising the profile of wildlife art, and therefore getting it in front of more people. And so that you're not just preaching to the converted, as you said, Martin. You're kind of like you're reaching new people, but as well as continuing to inform the people that are already on the same kind of wavelength as you as well.
I think that's a great point, and we just had a question in from Prasad, who says, you know, wonderful presentation from all of the artists, and as you were saying, you know, I think Prasad is a full-time professional nature artist themselves, but they said since wildlife art is not that popular when compared to other genres, you know, how do you get this and these kind of direct messaging into a more kind of sellable market, and therefore you do kind of, you know, reach those audiences beyond just the wildlife art space? And so that's a great question, which I think leads into this. So thanks, Prasad, for bringing that up.
I was going to say, just going back to what Tom said, I think technology has its place, and I think we're quite lucky nowadays to live in a time when everyone has this free promotion resource in social media, and you can reach people and places that you never would normally be able to reach. And so yeah, I agree that wildlife art maybe does have sort of a lesser of a reputation in the art world, perhaps, but at the same time it's more accessible, because who can't look at a picture of a certain animal or a certain landscape and appreciate that beauty, because nature is all around us for the most part. And so yeah, I think now is probably the best time that wildlife art reaches, you know, a broader kind of sort of group of people, because we have social media that we can use to get our artwork out there. People share it with other people that enjoy the animals or the nature, or for whatever reason that they sort of get involved in the first place. Once we start putting out sort of what more wildlife artivism, it sort of opens people's eyes a little bit more, I think.
It's almost like we have because the wildlife art is slightly more accessible to maybe a broader range of people, it maybe doesn't carry that slightly snobbiness that kind of high-end and institutionalized art world has. That's kind of our way in. It's almost like sneaking in around the back door with wildlife art, and being able to access more people as a result, definitely.
Alicia, did you want to say something on that? I saw you put your hand up.
Yeah, I think just linked to Sophie's point as well, it's quite I think it's quite sort of important to try and use like lots of different styles. So like using kind of sort of traditional wildlife art, as in not artivism, as in sort of just like a nice picture, and then people might sort of be drawn in and then sort of find your other kind of more powerful pieces, which will then make them think, even if they wouldn't normally sort of come across them. And then I think it's a way of potentially reaching a sort of audience you might not normally reach.
I think that's a good point. Is that there's so much more variety of art styles now within wildlife art, and I've also come across that snobby view of it, that it's an inferior art form. I know you have as well, Sophia. You know that you described it really well. People assume it's like a hobbyist kind of, you know, which is so insulting. And I'm always like, my argument to that is that there is an argument to say that wildlife art is perhaps the purest form of art, given the, you know, early humans in their caves, what they painted on their walls, it was wildlife, it was what was around them. So I've always felt that view is really unfair. But
I think in some ways it goes, unless I've misinterpreted aspects of art history, like in going back, you know, I don't know, the studio of Rembrandt, for example, where you've got many people working on some pieces, you know, like animals have always had a strong place in art, but more as like the side event, or very important in symbolism of other things. But it was all, I think, unless I've misinterpreted it, I may be wrong, like it was almost like, right, we've done all the figures, we've done the hard bit, we now need to get like the student in just to fill in the animals, because that's the easy bit. And I joke, but I genuinely think that this idea that the animals and painting animals is inferior to, say, figurative work and landscape work, I think that is quite deeply rooted within the art world. And I think whether it's conscious or not, I think that is there.
Maybe it's also deeply rooted in humanity, that we're selfish, and so we prefer to see images of ourselves, you know. But maybe there's something even deeper there. And that's been our downfall, is we've been far too focused on us. And
I think that a lot of art as well is quite market driven, and so you have different periods of art will, you know, you'll have different styles that at the time will be considered cutting edge, and I just don't think right now perhaps wildlife art is considered cutting edge. You know, the ironic conceptual art that's quite popular in modern art galleries at the moment, but it is, what, like you said, Mart, it's one of the oldest, or if not the oldest, form of art. Art, you know, nature and animals have always been in art and in poetry and writing, and now in photography, and it will continue to be there, but it's sort of like the one constant, and I don't know if maybe that's why it's not seen as above any other form of art, because it's just always been there, and it's sort of like the middle ground sort of thing. But going back to what I was saying about it being market driven, I think there is sort of a temptation as a wildlife artist to make your art more sellable by making it look pretty and not necessarily showing how wildlife and nature actually is, and have a lovely portrait of a lion or a tiger, but not showing the actual dire sort of situation that those animals are in. And so it is about balance. But
that's the big dilemma. It is trying to balance.
I think that's one of the biggest, like P mentioned that I host a podcast, just getting a plug in. But, in doing so, I have chatted to a lot of wildlife artists, and there are many common themes amongst artists. And number one is they're all passionate about wildlife. I think one of the other ones is that they are frustrated by the state of things, but wanting to help more, and kind of wrestling with making a living as an artist and making my work marketable, but also getting across a message and also and making a living as well. It's a really, really, really tough balance, and it's hard to know where to pitch it. And it's also a really tough balance between what sort of message do you put across, because we've all spoken about this before, that some messages that are very hard hitting, like some people really respond well to that. Like I know on a personal level, I actually respond better to pretty in your face, intense messaging. But other people on the other side, you know, if a message is too strong or too intense, it's almost like they just, you know, you kind of shut down. It's too much to handle. It conflicts with their worldview too much, and all sorts of stuff like this. So there's a very, very hard balance, but I think that it also creates an opportunity for a wide range of different styles of artwork, which kind of comes back around to that. Lots of different styles, lots of different messages can all have a positive effect.
We've had a great question in which slightly touches on what you guys were saying in terms of that slight myth, or, you know, the perception that wildlife art is almost the kind of lesser, you know, importance in terms of the art industry. But having said that, and, you know, having spoken about kind of marketability, one of the questions that's just come in is, saying thank you obviously for this wonderful talk, but do you think Artivism can be used to influence government and businesses as well as informing the public about particular topics or issues? So whilst we're almost playing down wildlife art as being not marketable, the power in terms of creating real change needs to also be kind of played out, because it does play such an important role in something. Sophia, this is you obviously work very strongly on this, and Martin, you were very involved in, for example, the canned hunting, where art actually made a significant difference. So in this minute, you know, people can dismiss wildlife art as almost the lesser of the kind of, you know, the art world, but yet the power that it holds, which is this whole concept of Artivism, is huge. Martin, do you want to jump in just in terms of how you think Artivism can be used to influence government and business, which just shows the power of it, despite it not necessarily being publicly consumer driven as much as other art trends are?
If you don't mind, Sophia, I'm so glad you brought that up, P, the canned hunting, because that's a wonderful example, case study of art working to affect change, like genuinely. Because very quickly, South Africa announced at the beginning of the month that they intend to shut down the industry in captive bred lions, which is a monumental thing to have happened. And it's largely down to campaigners, or it's mostly down to campaigners, in particular bloodlines, who have been fighting this for years. But they implemented last year, they put the call out to artists because they wanted to present to this panel. They were granted an audience, they wanted to present to the panel, they really wanted to impress. So they turned to art to impress and, you know, touch hearts of policymakers. And it worked. Within less than a year of that being implemented, this announcement came out. So I've actually written a blog as well on the Bloodlines page, if you want to go check that out, just to get in a plug for me as well. Called it the artwork that brought an end to the Captain Lion industry. Perhaps we could talk about artists' egos at some point. That might be another topic. But no, it's obviously all the credit goes to the campaigners. But what art did, art really was like the final nail in the coffin that sort of, you know, really affected that change. And I was so delighted to see that happen. But sorry, Sophia, did you want to say something on that?
I actually wanted to say something on the previous point, but I think it's too late already. So yeah, I just probably to add to what you just mentioned is that I believe that art might have a more of a long-term impact. So the example you just gave is great, but I don't think we need to believe that each of our artworks will do the same level of immediate impact. So we kind of need to get prepared to play in the longer term.
Commit, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it's like I think it was Sophie. Did you mention like people becoming desensitized slightly to a message? We almost get too used to seeing a message, and I think what Sophia is talking about as well is like it's almost like this relentless, just kind of getting the point across, and also bringing in new points all the time, and also I think what's really interesting is, and I know this again is something we've spoken about before, is how the impact of the image alone is amazing, but quite often you can almost like you know, tail stuff onto the back of the image to really drive points home. And I think that that combination of correct information with imagery and constantly like pushing it at people can be a really, really powerful thing, especially when done consistently, like anything.
Yeah. I totally agree, Tom. And just to, you know, jump in and add, and it's something we've kind of all chatted about before, but, you know, art is that kind of gateway into conversations that are either difficult or people don't want to necessarily have, because you wouldn't necessarily sit down and read a 10-page scientific document report or, you know, policy paper on, for example, the songbird trade, but actually just seeing that piece of artwork, you're automatically then using that as a gateway into further information because it's piqued your interest. And I think that's where art can play such a powerful role. And one of the questions which you guys have all kind of touched on is very much around that balance between, how can potentially more subtle messages be more powerful versus that kind of direct imagery. But I think, you know, art can be that gatekeeper into having quite difficult and, you know, intense conversations around topics that otherwise people would otherwise just shy away from, which I think is, you know, a really good point to make, Tom.
It's a lot more palatable art. That's the thing. It's not, preaching can come across as a bit aggressive. You know, people do switch off when you preach. I know, and so we talked about preaching to our family members as well sometimes, you know, it's to try and change their views, but I know it can come across difficult, whereas with art, it's a much softer in, but it doesn't lose, with, you know, good wildlife artivism, you don't lose any of the sincerity to it. You know, it's there, the message is there, and then you kind of unpick it.
Yeah, I think as well with quite an aggressive style of trying to change people's mind, people's reaction, either it goes one of two ways normally. Either they shut down and it almost becomes too overwhelming, or they make changes, but their changes are kind of performative, and it's almost like you're just doing it because you think you should, but you're not really sure why. And yeah, as you said, art is so much more palatable, and I think the best way to do it is sort of leading by example, but showing somebody a piece of artwork that they really love, and getting somebody really interested in what you're talking about is probably going to spur them on to do their own research and make their own changes. And it's really, it's nice to see when it happens.
Yeah, I think images also have the and obviously written information does as well, but in my own experience, like imagery has a stronger place in my mind. Like I'm more likely to remember an image, and then that will stimulate the information that comes along with it. And it's almost like image first, information after, but like the image is the trigger to recall this information, and that recalling of information has the potential, especially like Sophia said, when presented time and time again, that has the potential to change people's behavior. And when people's behavior starts to change, that's when, you know, we were talking about larger companies, even governments, when people's behavior starts to change, they have no option but to adjust and to step in line with that. And that takes a long time, and that can also be very disheartening. As Sophia so rightly said, like we can't all expect such a dramatic like shift of something, but these changes are subtle, but they are really there. And this is one of the wonderful things about David Shepherd Foundation, is we get to see these positive stories of the changes that are happening around the world. And that is so important, because otherwise I think we would all lose hope in many ways.
Such a good point. Hope is so important, isn't it? With everything, with all of this, you always have to have hope. You have to give people hope, otherwise, you know, you lose it.
Too bleak.
Yeah. Sorry, Sophie.
I think it's important to have a kind of a variety of messaging and balance, and having everything, the successes in diversity and variety of art. And as like Tom mentioned, perhaps the negative messaging works better for him and for myself, for example, but maybe for other people, the positive messaging work better. And I think, and now I'm talking as a wildlife artist, not as a conservationist, we should be more brave in expressing what we want to express. There are professional conservationists out there who will be, believe me, very, very, very careful with their messaging. So let's just be wildlife artists for a minute and don't really be afraid of putting our message out there.
I think this is one of the points we touched on, isn't it, when we had like a pre-chat, was I know I suffer from this as a wildlife artist and not a conservationist. I suffer from serious imposter syndrome, like, you know, what on earth are you doing talking about these fairly important issues in the world? And I think Sophia has certainly encouraged me to be a little bit more brave about tackling certain issues and presenting them in a certain way, and that it's okay to have simply an emotional reaction to these issues in the world. Like, that's okay. We're artists, like we're sensitive to this stuff, and our art is our emotional reaction to that, and that is very valid. We're allowed to have an emotional reaction to something that is beyond all of the information as well.
Yeah. Tichaona, I wanted to ask you, what's the wildlife art scene like in Zimbabwe? Is it maybe more respected than it seemingly is here?
Yes. Thank you, Martin, for bringing that question up. Yeah, wildlife art here in Zimbabwe is quite a big thing. Though we have contemporary artists coming up, but wildlife art is catching up so well with the young and upcoming artists.
Yeah, that's
so.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I really agree with Tom. You know, the issue of first bringing it up as images. Images speak up louder than, you know, than the preacher's words. Yeah, so it's quite a thing here in Zimbabwe. If you can, I can easily mention to you the prominent artists here in Zimbabwe. They are well known. Their reputation is based on wildlife art. So which tells me that wildlife is something which is still important here in my country. And by the way, you'll discover that most of the livelihoods, especially in this region where I am, in the Matabeleland North region in Zimbabwe, is based mostly on wildlife.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Yes.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's something that has to be reiterated over and over again, especially this time now when we are facing, you know, I can safely say, you know, poverty in my continent, especially in my country. is, I can say, is something that is pushing people to the edge I mean, not to count the wildlife as important part of their life, but when they look at it, they look at something which can give them money like in the snap of a finger, just like that, but forgetting the relationship that we share, that we have. So yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a point. There's something I wanted to move on to, actually, if we've got time, is the subject of eco-anxiety. I was just to stay with you, Tich, actually, because you're so close to a lot of our favorite subjects. You know, we often go straight back to the charismatic megafauna of Africa, elephants, rhinos, you know, the big cats. You're really close to that. I know, and I know from speaking to some of you others, we suffer from eco-anxiety because we're kind of presented with this a lot, but it's something that that people that aren't necessarily that involved in conservation, they find it extraordinary. I remember saying to a friend that was like talking about eco-anxiety, he's like, why do you get upset? And I was like, well, because it's my life. I'm constantly surrounded by these sad stories. I wondered about the rest of you. Do you suffer from eco-anxiety, and then what do you do to drag yourself out of it and make yourself feel better? Anyone?
I mean, I I don't know about you, but I suffer a lot from sort of like guilt and shame. It's my main, that's how it manifests for me personally. So I mean, we're all human, and I think, Tom, it was you that said that you suffer from imposter syndrome as well when you're talking about these conservation issues. And yeah, I think there's definitely an element of you know, doing the best that you can, but it's not really good enough. And are you doing the right thing, and you think that you're doing the right thing or buying the right thing, and then it turns out that that's not very good. And yeah, there's a lot of guilt and shaming others as well. And I think it's just important to remember that we're all human, we're all on the same planet. We just need to do the sort of best that we can. So sometimes I give myself a little talking to. That helps.
It's good because that is a point well made, actually, and it's something that the Resilience Project, who we're partnered with on the Ingrid Award. So your award, Alicia, will be contributing to this Resilience Project that are tasked with reducing eco-anxiety amongst activists. But they put a wonderful post out on social media. It was a pie chart thing, and it was just a reminder that activism is only a part of your life. It's not your whole life. And so what you were saying there, Sophie, about feeling guilty, you know, I get it totally. I'm always like that as well. But I just always try and take myself back to that post and go, this is just one part of your life. It doesn't have to dominate everything. And that does help me. But easier said than done, because very quickly, 2 minutes later, you're like, straight back to where you were. But
yeah, I think there's a real potential for like people to burn out, or you know, for it all just to get so much, and to the point where our mental health suffers to a huge extent, and then there's maybe a sense of hopelessness creeps in, or a sense of like, well, I'm just one person, like what's the point, it's not going to make any difference. So all of these little negative things that can creep in, and I have to say that my biggest kind of booster out of eco-anxiety, out of these issues that come along with being sensitive to this stuff, is my connection with like all of you guys, and the community of wildlife artists, and it's just a reminder that there are many people out there, at least on the same sort of page, and we're all sort of roughly trying to go in the same sort of direction. Like there's very few people that I know, and I can't speak for like larger corporations or any of that stuff, that's a whole different conversation, but that no one's actively thinking, right, I'm going to buy that because I actually want to destroy the environment. Like I'm actively destroying the environment. I'm sure there are many people like that, but I don't know them in my circles and in my greater circles, and that community is so important and so uplifting, and a reminder that we're all kind of moving in generally a common direction as what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and that's a good point about education, isn't it? It's a lot of the time people aren't necessarily doing it out of spite or, you know, in a malicious way. It's just not being educated.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's
and I think also that it's a good point with education, and talking more directly about kids now, children, like having younger cousins and also reading certain things from other countries about how children are being affected by the heaviness of all of this stuff that's going on. And I forget where exactly, I think it was in Australia, there was this movement that they had, children have basically had enough, and they were like, okay, we get it, like this is dire straits, but can we actually make some positive changes and move forward with some positive actions, because otherwise we're going to burn out by the time we're 16. And I think understanding that the children and younger people coming up are going to be a hugely important part of this. And for me, that's why imagery kind of spins back round, because having a little 5-year-old boy myself, like I understand how powerful that imagery is. And it is, like I said earlier, it's almost like imagery first, kind of information later. Imagery builds the connection, and off the back of connection, we have some level of meaning and back to empathy. And with that meaning and empathy comes a reason to care and a reason to change our behaviors and all of these things. And it's just this kind of potential to be an upward spiral, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, imagery first and detail later. I like that, because that sort of relates to collaborations with science as well, art and science, which is a really interesting area. And looking at the time, we probably haven't got much time to go into it. I know you're very active with that, Sofiya. In terms of your work is very driven by science, isn't it? And what's the word I'm looking for? Instructed by science.
Informed, yeah.
Yeah.
Well back
I think we are getting towards the end. I've realised, are there questions, maybe, P? I haven't been tracking it myself, but
yeah, we're in the last 50 minutes. I'd love to just come back to some of the questions, if that's all right. And we've had some wonderful ones in, so thank you everybody, just for your general comments, but also some questions. So a couple of questions that have come in. One is just more of a general question for the whole panel, but are there any collective Artivism initiatives or campaigns, or are most of them independent? And I know obviously we've touched on, Martin, you touched on, for example, the Bloodlines campaign, which around the canned hunting, which was very much a collective collaboration. But I'd love to get some of your input in terms of obviously the independent ones, in terms of what makes each of you guys, or, you know, whoever wants to kind of jump in, what's that kind of inspiration to either starting an independent campaign or creating a piece because there's a specific message that you want to talk about? So that's one of the questions just to kick off. So Martin, I don't know if you want to jump in.
I will, and I'll maybe pass it to Sofiya, because she might be better placed. But Sofiya and I have collaborated on a piece of wildlife artivism. It was the one that won New Human Impact, shark fins. I always loved that artwork, the composition, so much that I then used it in one of my artworks, with your permission, although I think I went ahead and did it and asked for permission later, but I knew you'd be cool with it. We were kind of hoping that might carry on and someone might take it on and create Shark Fins 3, but maybe we'll try and bring that up again. But you're currently involved in quite a big collaborative thing, Sofiya, with it's Songbird, start of Songbird Week, is that right?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I'm working for creature conserve organization, which are bringing artists and conservationist scientists together to work on conservation related topics. And one of the topics which we recently tackled was Asian songbird trade, obviously, because this is a topic which I'm really interested in, but we also involved a very talented scientist, Syrinjin, and also artists. So we ran a workshop, and we had, I think, 11 artists participating in various countries, from Malaysia to US to UK, from different parts of the world, who created pieces related to Asian songbird trade. And this resulted in a collaborative pattern with all the small artworks put together. And right now we're also doing a team week on our social media, which is also all about Asian songbird trade.
Wonderful. Yeah,
I think also as well as having like organized things, slightly ironically, after talking about the role of technology, I'm going to now flip it around and say like the power of social media is huge. And, you know, when you start talking about hashtags or simply a larger community of like-minded artists sharing each other's work, but also people that maybe feel like, you know, for example, I know lots of people that are very, very passionate wildlife artists, but they're not professional, and maybe they feel slightly aside to it in some ways, which I think is something that possibly needs addressing. But just using social media as a community to gain momentum and simply create more images and using hashtags, sharing each other's work, I think that should not be underestimated, and that is almost like a separate thing in itself. And then there are these more kind of, I don't know, organized or headed up areas as well. I think the combination of all of those things has the potential to be massive.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump in with a couple of questions. Just a point that Catherine makes, less so much of a question, which I think is really important, about potentially approaching university history of art courses, which might encourage the inclusion of contemporary wildlife art to connect the next generation of art curators to include wildlife art in a more public role in the future, which I think everyone would probably nod and agree with. And a question from Kat, which has just come in, which is around just saying, obviously, you know, loving the discussion, thank you to all the artists, but was wondering more specifically around what materials do you use in terms of that are eco-friendly, or what changes have you all made along the way in your art career to become more environmentally friendly artists? Because obviously you're preaching and wonderfully sharing these brave ideas and initiatives around artivism, but therefore how does that reflect in the consumptive habits as an artist needs to use as well? So Mart, I know, for example, there was some work that around the mongoose hair in brushes, for example, and things like that. So if anyone has any ideas or wants to share anything about the products that they use as an artist, would be really helpful, I think, in that.
There's two things, because firstly, that mongoose hair one's a very good point, because that relates directly to the art industry. And I learned from that, surprise, surprise, through Sofia's work. Again, she introduced me to that. I didn't know anything about brushes being made out of mongoose hairs, but there you go. And also might refer you to a podcast that Tom and I did together, and I can't remember which episode it was, but we did talk about this very subject. So I don't know, maybe we could find a link.
Yeah, but, we could share that link. It's something I've had an increasing interest in, like all of us, I'm sure. And one thing I'm doing at the moment, for example, I started in April, and I'm going to do a year of collecting all of my waste from my art practice to see like where the largest amount of waste is created with my own art practice. And I think that's really important. Like the for example, like synthetic brushes, although initially you think, oh, synthetic, not so great, you know, actually synthetic brushes have come a hugely long way, especially in watercolor. They're incredible now, and in many ways they last a lot longer, and if you look after them, they're perfectly acceptable brushes for a long time. And there's so many different ways. I've always said to people, like, you can make some small changes very quickly to your art practice and make a very big difference to your eco footprint, but actually it becomes harder and harder to make large changes. And that is something that I'm kind of background trying to look into and change a little bit. For example, as well, like oil painting has a bit of a reputation of being a very, very bad for the environment, practice. Yet, if done correctly, it has the potential to actually be one of the most eco-friendly, because you can use completely natural materials, but that takes a really concerted effort. And equally, acrylic painting, which has the potential, because it's water-based, to be really friendly, it's still ultimately like colored plastic, effectively. So we still need to consider the role of using acrylics, but if you filter your acrylic waste water correctly, like that can address that issue. I think that the underlying point is that the use of art materials is incredibly complex, and it does take a real concerted effort to make significant changes, but there are some initial ones that can make a big difference straight away. It just needs that research, and you need to look into it.
Yeah. And I also think not beating ourselves up too much, and let's come back to what you said, Sophie, about we are, after all, human, and to be human is to have flaws, and we can't all be perfect. And sometimes, you know, it is good to look into it, like you said, on a slowly, like, make small changes as you go.
But there's no point just suddenly deciding that your current practice is the environment and then just spinning it all.
So exactly,
you know, that's
right.
Ridiculous. And also, you know, we, like you said, Martin, it's so hard, it's so easy to put far too much pressure on ourselves, but just these little incremental changes with the right intention, in the right direction over time, you know, you will kind of veer off in a certain direction. And actually I found with closing down certain areas of the art material world because I no longer agree with them, it's amazing actually how that has directed my own art, and it's actually opened up more opportunities that I may have never considered before. I won't go into details now, but it's an interesting kind of diversion if you go down that road.
I think, Alicia, did you want to make a point before we have time for one more question before we have any closing remarks from the panel? Because we are coming up to the end, but Alicia, did you want to just jump in before I ask one more question?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say, like, not for my wheel piece, but for quite a few of my other pieces, I quite like using coffee, because partly because it's like a natural material, like it's, you know, just people normally drink it, I don't, but I like sort of like painting with it. So like, just because I think it's sort of, I find it really fun, but also because it's natural, and so I think it's sort of quite, I don't know, it's good for the environment, and it kind of can make environmental messages a bit stronger, I think.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thanks. Just like I said, we are coming to the end of this evening's discussions, but we've got one more question before we kind of open it up to any kind of final comments or remarks that Martin or anyone else might have. But this question, it's and one thing that, you know, we're doing a lot at DSWF is about it's not just art, it's the arts. So this is a question that kind of slightly expands on this, because obviously we've been very much focused today on art, but the question is, has this panel seen a step change in understanding or awareness, I would assume, as a result of the reach of films like Seaspiracy and My Octopus Teacher? A lot of this talking, and what we've been doing tonight, is talking about the creative way that you can tell stories, and I think those two are wonderful examples of how you can do that. So just a question if anyone wants to jump in and answer whether anyone has seen a step change in their understanding as a result of creative films like My Octopus Teacher or Seaspiracy.
100%, yeah. And actually, I think those, I'm glad someone's brought this up, because those big films that get a Netflix release, you know, that does break out of the echo chambers of conservation. So more people, you know, get to experience it. And I know just from personal experience, a friend of mine was at university with him, never showed any interest whatsoever in wildlife or animals. He watched that film and he got in touch and he was really moved by it. And he said that it's going to make him question whether he, you know, eats certain seafoods again. And for me, that was huge, especially because it was him, you know, like you would just never expect it. So
I think that's
we have an impact.
There's obviously a bigger picture, but one of the best things that you can expect as an outcome is simply that someone starts to consciously question their behaviors and their decisions. Like that's where it all starts. That's the gateway into whatever, but that's people start being aware and start making conscious decisions instead of unconscious ones. And
it's so important that we celebrate when someone is trying to make a change and not criticize because they're not an angel 100%, you know, because
none of us are even close to being an angel.
Exactly. So. It's impossible in the world we live in. So celebrating when people are trying to make an effort is a big one for me.
Yeah, I think there's almost like a reputation of sort of jumping on a bandwagon if someone decides to, I don't know, say not eat fish anymore, and then everyone that they know is like, oh yeah, you're not going to eat fish anymore. And yeah, that you do tend to get people that are skeptical. But yeah, I think it's really, really important. And those huge films with the big Netflix budgets, they break out and then they create interest. And then what normally happens is you watch the film and then you forget about the film. And then it's kind of up to us to keep, you know, putting out the message about these issues, because people, you know, amazingly, they make these changes in their lives. But it's easy to forget as well if you're not immediately sort of, you don't have it immediately in your sights all the time. So yeah, I think.
I think sorry, Martin, just say one final comment before I hand back to Martin to kind of close the evening, which I think actually is almost, we've had our own little Netflix moment, is a comment from Jane in terms of saying, thank you obviously so much for such an informative and entertaining webinar, but she says, when it ends, I'm off to Google the Songbird trade. So even by even that's our Seaspiracy moment, even by just having this conversation, and even by just having this, using the art and Sophia, your message, that's, even if it's just, Jane, and thank you, Jane, for doing that, but even if that's just generated one person going away and because of your art researching something that is, so important as the songbird trade, that's, this is where it all starts. So thank you, Jane, and also thank you to everyone else. I'm sorry that we don't have time to continue this debate for many hours into the evening, which I know we could all do. But Martin, obviously back over to you for any kind of final comments, if anyone wants to share anything at this stage.
Well, I just love to end it on that. That's absolutely wonderful, and that's one person. That's a little victory. But I'll just end. This has been so great. Thank you guys so much for coming on and having this chat. Like he said, I'm sure we could keep chatting for hours after this. But yeah, it's been really, really nice for me to hear all your perspectives, and I think there's some incredibly important work being done by everyone on this panel and so many others too. It's just left me feeling really uplifted. So thank you very much. I think
thank you. Cheers, man.
Cheers. Is that it, Pete?
It's been a pleasure.
Just any of the other panelists wants to just have any closing remarks. We do have a couple more minutes before, obviously we'll then say a very big thank you to everyone for joining. And obviously any of the artists, I think most of you all have websites or on social media, so please do follow the work, which is incredibly important. So if any of the other panelists have any closing remarks or want to say any final comments, please do jump in before we end tonight's discussion.
I'd quite like to say before we go, please, if you're watching this and you think to yourself, well, I'm just one person, don't think that, because, it's something that you posted a while back, Mart. It's sort of like, oh, but I'm just one person, thought 7.9 billion people. We can all make a difference, even if it's just making a slight change to your lifestyle or your consumer habits, whatever it is. Do it, because everybody can make a difference if everybody chips in.
Definitely.
Perfect. Well, on that note, then, thank you so much, everybody for joining. We have recorded the event, so if you have found to refer back to anything, we will be sharing it. So please do share. Sorry, Tich, did you have something you wanted to share before we go?
Well, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you guys and everyone who's watching it, everyone who's has joined us, asked some questions. We really appreciate that, and thank you very much for the world out there for recognizing our art as part of bringing the nature back to its original state. It's gonna be a hard thing, but I'm pretty sure if we take a very responsible part as individuals, even if you're not an artist, we really have to do something and connect back to nature. Everything created, I always say this, everything created as a creator, and we are part of that creation. We have to bring back everyone in and, connect back to nature and the creator. Yes, thank you, Georgina.
Well said.
Well said, yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, everybody. It's been really wonderful to sadly not see you all in person. Hopefully at some point, gone are the days of potential, book clubs. We can have Artivism clubs where, we can take debates onwards and upwards, and we can bring more conversation. So I know this won't be the end of many conversations that have started, and that is the wonderful thing, as Tom was saying, that kind of love-hate with technology, but it is a wonderful community, and we are hugely grateful. Obviously, just an official thank you, obviously, to Martin, to Tom, to Sophie, to Sophia, to Alicia, and to Tich for joining us this evening. It's been really fantastic, and to everyone who's watched along, everyone who's commented, and everyone who has supported not only the work at DSWF, but all of these incredible panelists and individual artists. A huge big thank you, and it's just been wonderful. So thank you very much, everyone, and good night.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, B.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Tich.